I didn't cry when I signed the papers. That came later. What I remember most is the silence. Not the comforting kind, the kind that cradles you after a long day. This silence had sharp edges. It scratched at the walls of my chest like a creature trying to get out. And still I sat there, in a lawyer's office that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and air freshener, beige walls, laminate desk, a man in a suit pushing a pen toward me like I was signing off on a dry cleaning slip. But I knew what I was doing. I was taking my name off the deed. I stared at that line for a long time. My name, 4 syllables that once felt like a promise. Now it was just ink, something to be erased, replaced, forgotten. Across the table, he didn't even look at me, not once. He'd already emotionally moved out years ago. I was just now catching up. It wasn't anger I felt. It was emptiness, a heavy, unmovable stillness inside me, like sitting at the bottom of a drained swimming pool. He used to say the house was ours. Every piece of crown molding, every garden bed I planted, every sleepless night I spent budgeting our way out of chaos. Ours. But somewhere along the way, ours became his, and I became inconvenient. I signed it anyway, because sometimes freedom wears the mask of loss. That evening, I moved into my sister's guest room with 3 boxes, a duffel bag, and a name no longer attached to a place. I stared at the ceiling all night, not crying, not sleeping, just existing in the wreckage. They say silence is golden, but no one talks about how much it can hurt when it's the only thing answering you back. And yet somewhere deep beneath the ache, I felt something shift, not relief, not clarity, not yet, just a whisper of myself, the part of me that had been buried under years of self-sacrifice and compromise, the part of me that remembered what it felt like to belong to no one but me. That whisper didn't have words yet, but it was there, and I listened. I wasn't always this woman, the one who flinches at kindness, who folds into herself when someone asks how she's really doing. I used to be loud with laughter, soft with love, and stubborn as hell when it came to the people I cared about, especially him. We met when I was 23. I remember the smell of paint on his jeans, the way his fingers moved like they belonged to something older, wiser. He was renovating a bookstore downtown, and I was there picking up a journal. He smiled like the world hadn't yet broken his heart. I smiled like I wasn't already halfway in love with the idea of being seen. That was the beginning. He asked me to dinner. I said yes. One dinner became a weekend, became a month, became 4 years and a ring. I still remember how it felt to wear that diamond, not because of its size, but because of what it meant. Someone chose me, claimed me, promised me forever. We bought the house just after our wedding. It was too big for us, but we had plans, a dog, maybe 2, a nursery one day. I painted the living room myself, spilling Sherwin-Williams across my sneakers, laughing as he chased me through the hallway with paint on his hands. We built more than walls. We built mornings, coffee before sunrise, grocery lists on the fridge, jokes only we understood. But slowly, quietly, the colors faded. He worked longer hours. I picked up more around the house. He forgot anniversaries. I forgave them. He stopped talking. I started writing letters. I never sent pages and pages of things I wanted to say, but didn't. The sacrifices came like waves, one after another, pulling me under. At first, I let them. It's what love does, right gives, bends, waits. I gave up the job I loved when he got promoted out of state. I left my friends behind. I said goodbye to my mother's Sunday dinners, my favorite book club, the sound of ocean wind, all for a new start, a new house, a new chance to keep him close. But I didn't realize then, keeping someone close isn't the same as keeping them connected. I started waking up feeling like a guest in my own life, like I was watching someone else's story from behind a glass wall. Meals were eaten in silence, touches turned into passing glances. Our bed, once filled with warmth, became just another surface we occupied at the same time. And through it all, I smiled. To everyone else, we looked like the perfect couple. Holiday cards with matching sweaters, dinner parties with polite laughter. But inside, I was shrinking, slowly, quietly. There was a moment, small, forgettable, to him that I'll never stop remembering. He came home late again. I asked him if everything was okay. He looked at me like I'd interrupted a thought that had nothing to do with me. Yeah, he said, don't make this a thing. That was the first time I realized I'd become a thing, not a person, not a partner, just a weight, an obligation, a name on a deed. But still I stayed, because I believed that love meant holding on. It would take me a long time to understand that real love doesn't require you to disappear in order to keep it. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't show up in photographs. It doesn't wear black. It doesn't cry. It doesn't scream for attention. No, it sits next to you. At breakfast, fills the silence between how was your day and fine, and crawls into bed between two people who haven't touched in weeks. That kind of loneliness became my shadow. It followed me through every room of the house I no longer recognized. The house I once dreamed of decorating for Christmas, now just a backdrop to my quiet decline. He stopped noticing when I got my hair done. I stopped noticing when he stopped noticing. Little things died first. The flowers I used to buy for the kitchen table, the texts during the day, the inside jokes, the way he used to kiss my forehead like it meant something. I tried. God, I tried. I suggested weekend getaways, date nights, counseling. I even booked a reservation for our anniversary. He forgot, of course. Said he had a meeting. I ate alone, wearing a dress he never saw. And still, I told myself, maybe next month, maybe after this deadline, maybe after the promotion, maybe, until the maybe became a never, and the never became normal. I remember one morning waking up and realizing I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a social one. A real, belly-deep, soul-shaking laugh. The kind that makes you forget time. I realized I couldn't remember the last time he looked at me like he used to. Hell, I couldn't remember the last time I looked at me. Who was I? Some days I wandered the house like a ghost, folding laundry that wasn't mine, cooking meals for a man who didn't even sit at the table, cleaning a bathroom he barely used. I kept everything running like a machine, quiet, functional, invisible. I was disappearing. The worst part, no one noticed. At a family gathering, someone asked if we were planning to have kids. I smiled, said something vague. He laughed and changed the subject. That night in the car, I asked him if he still saw a future with me. He didn't answer, just turned up the radio. That silence said everything. It's strange how grief can live inside a living relationship, how you can mourn a person who sleeps beside you every night, how you can grieve the loss of yourself long before anyone else does. I began writing again, not letters this time, but journal entries, raw, unfiltered, sometimes just scribbles. They didn't make sense at first, but they were mine, a place where I could scream without making a sound. The first entry I wrote simply said, "I miss me." That was the beginning, not of change, not yet, but of awareness, of seeing myself not as a failed wife, but as a person being erased, one line at a time. The turning point didn't come like lightning. It arrived quietly, like everything else in my life had lately. No drama, no confrontation, just a moment, a sliver in time so ordinary it should have meant nothing. I was cleaning out the junk drawer in the kitchen, looking for batteries, I think. Instead, I found a letter, folded in thirds, no envelope. My name wasn't even on it. But I opened it anyway because it was already half open, and maybe because I was starving for something, anything that felt like truth. It was from a lawyer, a trust and estate attorney, dated 6 weeks earlier. The letter was about a property, my grandmother's lake cabin, the one we used to visit every summer when I was little. She'd left it to me. I remembered she once said she'd make sure I'd always have a place to breathe. I thought it was just sentimental, but here it was, in legal print. He hadn't told me. My husband had opened it, read it, and said nothing. No surprise, really. Just confirmation of something I'd already started to know. I didn't live in this marriage anymore. I just occupied a corner of it. I sat on the floor letter in one hand, a dead battery in the other, and laughed. A real startled laugh. Not because it was funny, but because something in me cracked something that had been holding on for too long. I didn't say anything to him that night. Didn't accuse, didn't cry. Just watched him as he ate dinner, scrolling through his phone, never once looking at me. And I thought, this man doesn't know me. Not anymore. Maybe he never really did. That night, I pulled out my journal and wrote 4 words. Start the exit plan. It felt ridiculous, dramatic, but also like oxygen. I began gathering things, quietly, methodically, not out of pettiness, but out of necessity. My passport, my birth certificate, my grandmother's letter. I made copies of everything. I opened a separate bank account. I didn't touch our joint funds. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was just trying to exist outside of him. I started going to the lake house on weekends, told him I needed space to think. He barely acknowledged it. I half expected him to protest. He didn't. The lake house was a mess, dusty, cold, but it smelled like freedom. I cleaned it room by room, slept with the windows open, drank wine on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled like my childhood. And for the first time in years, I heard my own thoughts again. I remembered who I was before him. I remembered dancing barefoot on the dock as a teenager. I remembered the sound of my grandmother's voice when she told me, "You don't have to stay where you're not seen." I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. I needed it to be mine. I needed at least one part of my life that wasn't filtered through someone else's expectations. One night, while unpacking an old box, I found a picture of me at 16, sunburned, smiling, middle finger up to the camera like I owned the world. And I whispered to her, "I'm coming back." That's when I knew I wasn't leaving because he betrayed me. I was leaving because I remembered I still existed. Confrontation isn't always a screaming match. Sometimes it's a stillness so complete it becomes deafening. That was how mine began, with stillness. I waited until everything was in place. My name was already off the deed we had done that months earlier, during a refinance he orchestrated, assuring me it was for better rates. I believed him, trusted him, until I realized what he was really doing, making sure I had no claim. That hurt. But what hurt more was realizing that he had done it so casually, like erasing me from our shared life, was a clerical task, not a betrayal. I had proof now. I had documents. I had the letter from the estate attorney, and I had silence on my side. One night I asked him if we could talk. He barely looked up from his laptop. Now. Yes, I said, steady. Now. We sat across from each other at the dining table, same table where we'd once celebrated our first mortgage approval, our 5th anniversary, our last New Year's Eve together, as anything close to a couple. I pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. What's this? He asked, already irritated. My grandmother's cabin, I said. You opened the letter. You knew she left it to me. You said nothing. He blinked. A flicker of guilt, or maybe just calculation. I didn't think it mattered, he said after a moment. It mattered to me. He leaned back in his chair, defensive. Why are you making a thing out of this? Because I am a thing I wanted to say. A person, a partner, a woman with a name and a past and a future that you don't get to rewrite just because you're tired. Instead, I said, you took my name off the house, quietly, behind my back. He shrugged. You signed the papers. Yes, I replied, because I trusted you. I thought we were on the same team. We are, he said. But even he didn't sound convinced. No, I said, we're not anymore. And that's okay, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend I don't know what's been happening. He stood, walked to the window, hands in his pockets. The silence stretched between us, taut and loaded. I'm moving out, I said. That got his attention. He turned. To where? The lake house, the one that's mine. He stared at me. For the first time in months, maybe years, he really looked. Not with affection, not even with anger, but with something that resembled respect. Is this about money? He asked. I laughed softly. No, it's about dignity. He didn't stop me, didn't fight, didn't ask me to stay, which strangely was the final confirmation I needed. This marriage had been over for a long time. 2 weeks later, I was gone. The day I left, I walked through every room of the house and whispered goodbye, not to the furniture or the walls, but to the version of me who had lived there, the woman who bent, broke, stayed too long, the woman who forgot she had a voice. I took her with me, not the wounded parts, but the parts that had survived. The first morning at the lake house, I didn't set an alarm. I woke up to birdsong and wind tapping gently on the old window panes. There was no coffee brewing, automatically, no husband stomping around looking for his tie, no emails lighting up my phone, just stillness, real stillness. I lay in bed for a long time staring at the ceiling beams. They were warped and cracked in places like they'd weathered too many storms. I understood them. The sheets smelled like cedar. The floor creaked under my feet as I padded to the kitchen. It was barely stocked, just some canned goods and a bottle of wine I'd brought, but it was mine. I made coffee with an old percolator and stood on the back porch, cradling the mug in both hands, watching the fog lift off the lake. It was the first time in years I didn't feel like I had to rush into someone else's needs. The house itself was a mess. The plumbing groaned. The roof had a slow leak. The wallpaper in the hallway was peeling. But none of that mattered, because this place, this crooked, dusty place, was the first thing in a long time that felt like a beginning, not an ending. I started small. A list on a yellow notepad. Fix the kitchen sink. Repaint the upstairs bedroom. Replace the porch railing. Breathe. I didn't tell anyone I'd moved. Not yet. I needed the world to be quiet while I remembered how to exist without apology. Some nights I cried, not from regret, but from release, the kind of tears that only come when you realize you've been holding your breath for years. I cried for the version of me that waited, that hoped, that gave and gave and gave. But I also laughed. One night I cooked pasta and danced barefoot in the kitchen to a song I used to love. I caught a glimpse of myself in the window, wild-haired, grinning glass of wine in hand, and thought, there you are. She was still in there. I started wearing red lipstick again. Not for anyone, just for me. I wrote letters I never sent. I bought fresh flowers for the table every Sunday. I took long walks, sometimes barefoot, through the woods that surrounded the lake. I found old journals from college, filled with dreams I had abandoned to be someone else's wife. I didn't regret the time I'd given, but I mourned the time I'd stopped giving to myself. One evening, I pulled out my grandmother's recipe box. Inside, beneath the worn index cards and handwritten notes, was a letter she'd written before she died. It read, "To my darling girl, if you're reading this, it means life has sent you searching. Good. That means you're still fighting for something better. This house is yours, not because you need a place to hide, but because you deserve a place to rise. Don't just survive here. Become." I cried then, and when I stopped, I picked up the hammer and started working on the porch railing. I wasn't rebuilding a house. I was rebuilding me. You think healing will be linear, that once you leave, once you reclaim your space, your name, your voice, it'll all fall into place. But no one tells you how strange it is to feel free and afraid at the same time. Some mornings I woke up with a smile, others with a weight in my chest I couldn't explain. Grief is like that. It doesn't honor timelines. I remember sitting on the edge of the dock one morning, bare feet skimming the water. A heron landed a few feet away, calm and unapologetic in its stillness. I watched it for nearly 20 minutes, jealous of its poise, its ease. I wanted that kind of stillness inside me, not the silence I'd lived through in that marriage, but peace, the kind that lives deep in your bones. That day, I drove into town. I hadn't been to the farmer's market since I was a child. Everyone seemed to know everyone else. I was just the quiet woman in sunglasses, buying too many peaches. A vendor asked if I was new around here. I almost said, just visiting, but caught myself. No, I said, I live here. The words tasted strange, like a truth I hadn't realized I was allowed to claim. I started talking to people again, carefully, slowly, not about my past, just about life, books, gardens, paint colors. I began volunteering at the library on Saturdays. I read aloud to kids. I shelved books. I refilled the tea station. Small things, but they made me feel real again. And then one afternoon, I saw his name in my inbox. No subject line, just his name. My stomach flipped. My fingers hovered over the mouse, hesitant. I clicked. It was one sentence. Can we talk? Just like that, the past cracked open. I sat there for a long time, staring, feeling, remembering. And then I did something I never would have done before. I didn't respond. I didn't feed the ghost. I closed the laptop and went outside, walked the edge of the lake until the sun set behind the trees. The wind was cool on my skin. My phone stayed inside. That night, I wrote in my journal, I don't owe closure to the person who broke me silently. I owe clarity to the woman I'm becoming. The next day, I blocked his number, not out of spite, but because peace is a boundary, and I was done handing out access to people who never earned it. By the end of my 3rd month at the lake house, Something had shifted in me. I no longer measured my days by what I had escaped, but by what I had embraced. The air felt different. Food tasted better. Even the quiet, once unbearable, now felt like a kind of music. I began waking up early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I liked the way the mist clung to the trees before the sun burned it off. I liked the slow ritual of coffee and bare feet on the porch. I liked that no one expected anything from me at 7 a.m. I had space to breathe. But more than that, I had space to imagine again. I started painting, badly at first. My grandmother had left a box of acrylics and brushes in a closet upstairs, and I set up a little makeshift studio in the sunroom. I didn't care if the strokes were messy. I wasn't trying to be good. I was trying to feel, and I did. With every canvas, I layered parts of myself back into existence. One afternoon, while painting the lake in muted blues and greens, I realized I hadn't thought about him all day. Not once. That felt like its own kind of freedom. Not angry freedom, not triumphant freedom. Just a quiet loosening of something that had once clenched my chest tight. The divorce papers arrived in the mail a few days later. No note, no phone call, just a thick envelope and a return address. I signed them without ceremony. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just signed. Later that evening, I stood by the water and let the wind take my breath for a moment. I whispered, thank you not to him, but to whatever force inside me had refused to give up. Because even at my most invisible, something inside had held on. People in town started recognizing me. You're the woman fixing up the old Cooper place, they'd say, and I'd smile. Not because I was proud of the renovations, but because someone was seeing me for something I was building, not just surviving. I said yes to things I used to avoid. I went to a poetry reading. I tried paddleboarding. I sang at an open mic night with a voice so shaky I could barely hold a note. But no one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. They clapped. And for once, I didn't shrink from the sound. I began to write again. Real writing. Stories, not just journal entries. Fiction at first, but all of them had some version of a woman who walked away from a life that didn't see her, who made something beautiful out of her breaking. A woman like me, not perfect, not healed in a straight line, but real, breathing, here. I wasn't looking for love. I didn't need to be saved. I wasn't looking for closure. I didn't need to be heard. What I needed was already happening. I was becoming. It happened on a Tuesday. A perfectly ordinary day. Blue sky, warm sun, the kind of breeze that makes you forget anything bad ever happened. I was at the hardware store, of all places, looking for stain to redo the dock. I'd learned to do things myself, now repairs, tools, power drills. I wasn't great, but I was proud. I had dirt under my fingernails and sun on my shoulders. That's when I saw her, his sister. We hadn't spoken since the wedding anniversary dinner 3 years ago, the one he skipped, the one where I smiled my way through awkward explanations. She looked the same, sharp suit, polished nails, that air of someone always on the verge of an important meeting. She spotted me instantly and walked over like she had a mission. Hey, she said, you look different. I am, I said, and I meant it. We stood there, surrounded by paint samples and fertilizer. She didn't waste time. He told me what happened, about the lake house, the divorce, everything. I nodded, not defensive, not apologetic, just present. She shifted. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't know how unhappy you were, how far things had gone. I didn't reply at first, because it didn't matter. She hadn't been the one who erased me, but she kept going. He's not doing great. You probably don't care, but I thought you should know. I did care, not because I wanted to save him, but because I had loved him once, and even now, I didn't want destruction. I just wanted distance, freedom. I hope he finds what he's looking for, I said softly. She nodded. And you seem happy. I'm not always, I replied. But I'm honest with myself. That's new. She reached into her purse and handed me a card. If you ever need anything, a connection, help, just don't disappear again. I smiled gently. I'm not disappearing. I'm finally arriving. Later that night, I sat on the porch and thought about what it meant to be seen by someone who used to know you only in shadows. I realized I didn't hate him. I didn't love him either. He was just a chapter, a long, painful one, but not the whole story. I lit a candle and opened my journal. I wrote, healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without bleeding. Then I closed the book and sat quietly. No music, no phone, just the sound of water, wind in the trees, my own breath steady. He would always be part of my past, but he didn't belong in my future. That was mine to write now. I used to think reinvention required a clean break, a dramatic cut, a total reset. But I've learned that becoming yourself again is more like excavation, quiet, patient, layer by layer. One evening, I found an old box in the attic of the lake house, buried beneath dusty linens and a cracked lamp. Inside were letters ones I'd written to myself over the years and never mailed. Some from college, some from the early days of my marriage, some from the last few years when things were unraveling, though I hadn't yet admitted it out loud. I sat on the floor, surrounded by yellowing paper and old grief, and read each one. In one I had written, I'm so tired of saying I'm fine when no one is really asking. Another, maybe love isn't supposed to feel like this, like erasure with a smile. And the oldest one, please don't forget who you are when someone else needs you to be smaller. I cried reading that one, not from sadness, but from recognition, because I hadn't forgotten. Not completely. The version of me who wrote those words had been buried under years of compromise, silence, and shrinking. But she had still been there, writing notes in the dark, trying to light a match inside a cave. Now she was standing in the sun. That week, I submitted a short story to a literary magazine. It was about a woman who moves into a broken-down cottage after a divorce. It wasn't subtle, but it was honest, and it got published. The editor emailed me and said, there's something haunting and beautiful about your voice, like you've lived 10 lives in one. I laughed. He wasn't wrong. It didn't make me feel famous. It made me feel real. I printed the story and pinned it on the fridge, next to a picture of me and my grandmother on the dock 20 years ago. We were barefoot, smiling wind in our hair. I looked at her face, mine younger, and whispered, we made it. I started calling myself a writer again, not just in my head, out loud. When people asked what I did, I said I write, because I do, because I always have. It wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about living, expanding, owning space. I rearranged the furniture, repainted the front door a bold red. I planted sunflowers in the side yard, even though the soil wasn't ideal. I lit candles for no reason. I played Nina Simone loud while I cooked. I slept diagonally across the bed just because I could. One morning while walking through town, I passed a woman who looked tired in the way I used to tight smile, downward eyes, hands clasped too tightly. I didn't stop her. I didn't say anything. But I silently sent her this, "You're allowed to want more. You're allowed to leave. You're allowed to begin again." Because I wasn't going back. It started with a bookshelf, not love, not even interest. Just a bookshelf I couldn't lift. I had bought it from a secondhand store in town, sturdy, tall, heavy as regret, and somehow convinced myself I could get it out of my car, up the front porch steps, and into the living room alone. I couldn't. After 20 minutes of struggling, I sat on the porch, sweating and laughing at myself. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Need a hand?" I turned, startled. It was a man I'd seen once or twice. Around town, a few years older than me, maybe. Wore glasses, carried a dog-eared paperback everywhere. The kind of man who didn't make noise when he walked. I hesitated. Old reflexes kicked in. I almost said no. I almost waved him off. But something in me, the new part, the braver part, nodded. "If you don't mind." He smiled, lifted the bookshelf like it weighed nothing, and followed me inside. We didn't talk much. He set it down where I pointed, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked around the room. "Cozy," he said. "You live here alone." I nodded. "Happily." He grinned. "Good. That's rare." He left without lingering. No weird energy, no assumptions, just a small wave and a take care. I didn't think about him again until I saw him at the library 2 days later. He was reading at one of the corner tables. He looked up, recognized me, and offered a smile that didn't ask for anything. We started seeing each other in the same places, bookstores, farmers, market, the trail by the lake. And slowly, cautiously, we began to talk. Nothing heavy, no trauma dumps, just books, music, favorite meals, places we wanted to visit, memories that made us laugh. I found myself looking forward to those conversations, not because I was falling, but because I wasn't pretending. He never asked about my ex, never pushed. He just listened when I spoke and remembered what I said. He brought me tea when I mentioned I liked cinnamon. Left a book on my porch once with a note. The main character reminded me of you, strong, a little wounded, still moving forward. It didn't feel like romance, not in the way I used to know it. It felt like witnessing. One night as we walked along the lake, he said quietly, "I don't need to fix you. Just want to know you." I stopped walking because in all my years of loving, I had never heard that before. I had been someone's project, someone's mirror, someone's possession, but never just someone to know. I didn't kiss him that night. Instead, I went home and wrote in my journal, "I'm not healed yet, but maybe love doesn't require perfection. Maybe it just requires presence." The next day, I baked him a pie. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Falling in love again was not something I planned. It felt less like falling and more like walking, slow, deliberate, step by careful step. There were no fireworks, no whirlwind declarations, just an unfolding, a noticing. I noticed how he listened, not the kind of listening that waits to respond, but the kind that hears what isn't said. I noticed how he paused before answering, like he respected silence. I noticed how he never flinched at my independence, never tried to shrink it. And I noticed how terrified I was, not of him, but of becoming her again, the woman who once traded herself in for someone else's comfort, the woman who disappeared inside a partnership. I spoke that fear aloud one night, over dinner on my porch. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He just took a sip of his wine and said, "Then don't disappear." It wasn't romantic. It was true. "I like you exactly as you are. He added, "You don't have to soften yourself for me." And in that moment, I realized real love doesn't dilute you. It doesn't ask you to be smaller to make room for someone else. Real love stands beside you, not in front. So I kept writing. I submitted 2 more stories. One was accepted. The other was rejected. I framed the rejection letter, not out of irony, but because it meant I was trying again. I went kayaking by myself one morning and tipped the boat within 10 minutes. I laughed so hard I scared off a nearby duck. I walked back to the cabin, soaked and grinning. I told him about it that night, and he said, "Next time I'll bring a towel. Not I'll take over, just I'll show up." There was no rushing between us, no need to define. We let it be what it was: easy, intentional, present. And I kept doing the work. Therapy, journaling, slow walks through my old pain. I forgave myself for staying too long, for being quiet when I should have spoken, for giving when I had nothing left to give. I made peace with the woman I was in that marriage, not by blaming her, but by thanking her. She did the best she could, and when she couldn't anymore, she left. I visited my old neighborhood once, drove by the house. The curtains were different, the yard overgrown. I didn't stop, didn't linger. I just whispered, "Thank you," and kept driving. Because every version of me deserved a thank you, even the broken ones, especially the broken ones. I no longer needed a dramatic ending to prove I had moved on. The proof was in my peace, in the quiet mornings, in the clean sheets, in the laughter that came from my belly instead of my mask. He asked me once if I'd ever want to live with someone again. I didn't hesitate. "Only if I can still close my door," I said. He smiled. "Good. I'd want the same." And that was enough. It started small, like most meaningful things do. An email, a stranger, a subject line that read, "Your story saved me." At first I thought it was spam, but when I opened it, it was from a woman in another state. She had read one of my published stories. She wrote about a husband who made her feel invisible, about how she'd clipped her own wings just to keep peace in a house that never truly welcomed her. "I didn't know someone else had lived that kind of silence," she wrote, "and survived it." I stared at the screen for a long time, tears in my eyes, not just for her, but for all the women like her, like me, who had spent years editing themselves to fit into a life that didn't love them back. I responded, not as a therapist, not with advice, just as a woman who understood. I wrote, "You're not alone, and it's not your fault for staying. Survival looks different for everyone. You get to decide when it's time to leave and who you'll be when you do." She replied. Then another woman did, and another. Soon I found myself writing not just fiction, but essays, open letters, honest bleeding paragraphs about marriage, invisibility, money shame, and starting over at 40 with nothing but a lake house and a name I had to relearn how to say with pride. I didn't call it a movement. I didn't call it healing work. I just called it writing, but the emails kept coming. I created a small blog. No ads, no sponsors, just words, and a comment section that became its own little village of women, reminding each other they weren't broken, just buried. One day I got a message from a college student. She was studying creative writing and had come across my work. She asked if I could review one of her essays. I did. Then I asked if she wanted to talk. One Zoom call turned into weekly chats. She called me her writing mother. I told her I was just someone who survived out loud. Soon I was hosting virtual circles, nothing fancy. Just women with tea and blankets and too many stories. Some cried, some cursed. Some said nothing at all, just listened. It felt like church, not the kind with pews, the kind with truth. I never told them what to do. I never told them to leave or stay. I just told them what I wished someone had told me. Your pain isn't imaginary just because someone else can't see it. You don't need permission to want more. You're allowed to reclaim your name on the deed, on the spine of a book in your own mouth. And then I'd sit back and let the echoes pass from screen to screen, heart to heart. It wasn't a job. It wasn't a title. It was just the most honest thing I had ever done. And every time someone said, "Me too," I whispered back, "I see you," because I did. Peace, I've learned, can be unsettling when you're not used to it. There were days when everything was quiet, too quiet. No fires to put out, no lies to swallow, no cold silences to decode. And that's when the doubt would sneak in, soft-footed and persuasive. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe you were too sensitive. Maybe you gave up too soon. Old stories, familiar lies. Trauma doesn't always leave with the person who caused it. Sometimes it lingers like fog, reshaping the landscape even after the storm has passed. I caught myself one afternoon scrubbing the kitchen sink obsessively, back and forth, harder and harder, until I realized I wasn't cleaning. I was punishing for what I didn't even know, for being too loud, too independent, too alive. The old voices whispered, "This is too much. No one stays when you're like this. Who do you think you are?" And that's when I did something radical. I stopped. I sat on the floor, back against the cabinet, breathing in the scent of lemon soap and old tile. And I said aloud, "You are not unlovable just because someone failed to love you properly." I repeated it until my voice didn't shake, until it sounded like mine. That night, I told him the quiet, kind man I'd been growing something new with. I told him about the voices, the fears, the leftover shame. I expected him to flinch, to retreat, to tell me it was too much. Instead, he took my hands and said, "You don't have to be perfect here, just honest." I cried into a shirt for 20 minutes, not because I was broken, but because I was safe. Safety, it turns out, can feel scarier than pain when pain is all you've known. But I was learning to let the good in, learning that I didn't need to earn peace. I only needed to stop fighting it. I started therapy again, this time not to survive, but to grow. I unpacked things I'd buried so deeply I forgot they belonged to me. Guilt, anger, dreams I'd left behind. My therapist said, "You don't need to rebuild the woman you were. You get to build something new." So I did. I joined a local art group. I hosted a potluck at the lake house and filled it with people who had never known me as anyone's wife, only as myself. I danced barefoot on the porch to music that made no sense but made me move anyway, and I gave myself permission to rest, not because I'd earned it, but because I was worthy of it. One evening, while journaling, I wrote, "Happiness isn't a reward for suffering. It's a right, and I don't need anyone's permission to claim it." Then I lit a candle, closed the windows, and went to sleep without checking my phone. That too was healing. I always thought closure would look like a door slamming shut, a dramatic scene, final words shouted across a room. But when it came, it was quieter than I expected. It came in the form of a letter, not an email, not a text. A real letter, handwritten, shaky, folded into a plain white envelope with no return address. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from him, my ex-husband. I held it for hours before opening it, left it on the kitchen counter like it was something radioactive. Every time I passed it, my heart skipped. Part of me didn't want to know. Part of me couldn't stop wondering. That night I finally opened it. The letter was short, 3 paragraphs. He wrote, "I've been doing a lot of thinking about you, about us, about the kind of man I was and wasn't. I don't know if apologies matter this late, but I'm sorry for the silence, for not fighting for you, for assuming you'd never leave. I guess I thought your love would always outrun your pain. You were better than I deserved. I see that now. I just wanted you to know I've been reading your stories. They're beautiful, like you always were. I don't expect a response. I just wanted to say thank you for everything." I folded it slowly, not because I was emotional, but because it felt like laying something to rest, a chapter, a ghost. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the need to reply, not because I was angry, because I was free. I walked outside barefoot. The grass was cool under my feet. The stars were especially bright that night, as if the universe was bearing witness to something I couldn't name. I burned the letter, not out of hate, out of ceremony, because I didn't need his words to validate my healing. I didn't need his regret to complete my story. I was already whole. The ashes curled and scattered into the breeze. I watched until there was nothing left but embers. Inside, I opened my journal and wrote, "Closure is not about the other person. Closure is when your peace no longer requires their participation." Then I turned off the lights, went to bed, and slept through the night without waking once. I no longer introduced myself as someone who went through a hard time. That season of my life was real. It shaped me, but it no longer defined me. These days, when someone asked what I did, I said I write stories. I run a small women's circle. I garden. I live by the lake. I always added the lake part, because somehow the water had become part of me, quiet, reflective, sometimes turbulent, always deep. I wasn't chasing survival anymore. I was cultivating joy. The blog had grown beyond anything I imagined. Not into something viral or famous, but something intimate, alive. Women sent photos of their new apartments, their solo vacations, their half-finished paintings. I printed them out and made a wall in my office. I called it the Becoming Wall. Every photo, every note, every trembling piece of honesty was a mirror. They weren't following me. We were walking together. One woman wrote, "I left him with nothing but a suitcase, and I've never slept better." Another, "Your story gave me language for a silence I couldn't name. I read them slowly like prayers." One day I received a package. Inside was a hardcover book, my own published at last. A small press had picked up my collection of essays. The cover was soft blue with bold white letters, things I didn't say when I was disappearing. I ran my fingers over the title like it was a scar I'd learned to bless. When the first box of author copies arrived, I sat on the porch, held one to my chest, and cried. Not because of pride, because I had something to show the girl who once believed she was too invisible to ever matter. She mattered. That night, I walked down to the dock and read aloud from chapter 1, to the trees, the stars, the water, myself. It wasn't about who heard me. It was about the fact that I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't writing to be saved. I wasn't performing survivals. I was creating from abundance, not absence. The man I was seeing came by later that evening. He brought tea, didn't say much, just sat beside me quiet and steady. He ran a hand down my back and said, "You look like yourself tonight." And I smiled, not because he said it, but because I knew it was true. I finally looked like myself. I cooked dinner that night and danced in the kitchen with no reason except music and movement and breath. At some point, I caught my reflection in the window. No makeup, messy bun, laugh lines, barefoot and radiant. And I whispered, "Welcome home." I didn't go back to town for closure. I went for a wedding. A mutual friend, someone who knew both of us, once had sent an invitation months ago. I nearly declined, not because I was afraid of running into him, but because I wasn't sure. I wanted to see that version of my life again. The sidewalks I used to walk while shrinking. The cafe where I used to pretend everything was fine. But something in me whispered, go, not for him, for you. So I went. I wore a navy dress I'd bought for no occasion at all. My hair was pulled back loosely, my favorite earrings catching the light. I didn't try to dazzle. I didn't armor up. I just arrived as myself. The ceremony was beautiful, intimate, tender, full of awkward laughter and the kind of vows that feel lived in. I smiled. I clapped. I cried a little, not because of regret, but because love still moved me. Not romantic love, human love, brave love. At the reception, people noticed. You look amazing. You seem different. I simply said I am. And then I saw him. He was standing by the drinks table, a little grayer, thinner, not unkind looking, just ordinary. A man I used to orbit around like he was the sun. He looked over. Our eyes met. He gave a small nod. Not a beckon, not an invitation, just acknowledgement. I nodded back, and that was it. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. There was nothing left to explain. He had let me go, and I had walked away. Later, as I stepped outside for air, I ran into his sister again, the same woman who had handed me her card at the hardware store so many months ago. You really got out, she said softly. I really came back, I corrected. She tilted her head. Was it worth it? I smiled. Every quiet, aching, glorious second. Then I left. No dramatic exit, no parting words. I drove through the old streets with the windows down, letting the wind braid through my fingers. I passed the grocery store where I used to bite my tongue, the gas station where we fought in the car, the corner where I used to wait, hoping he'd remember to pick me up. None of it hurt anymore. They were just places, not scars. That night, back at the lake house, I sat on the dock and lit a candle for every version of me that had carried me here. The one who gave too much, the one who stayed too long, the one who finally packed a bag and didn't look back. I whispered, thank you to all of them. Then I blew out the flame and let the dark hold me not as a threat, but as a witness. I used to think becoming meant transformation, that I'd wake up one day unrecognizable to the woman I once was, stronger, sharper, untouchable. But the truth is, becoming isn't about turning into someone new. It's about peeling back everything that isn't you. It's remembering who you were before the world asked you to edit yourself. And in that remembering, I didn't become a warrior. I didn't become a phoenix. I became human again, soft, scarred, sacred. At the lake house, life had settled into a rhythm. Mornings on the porch, afternoons writing or walking, evenings with music and tea, sometimes quiet, sometimes filled with laughter, shared with others. Nothing grand, but everything honest. And then one afternoon, I got a call. It was from my old university. They were hosting a creative writing symposium and had stumbled upon my work. A professor who had once taught me in a class I barely remembered had submitted my book as recommended reading. We'd love for you to speak, they said. My first instinct was panic. What would I say? Who did they think I was? But then I caught myself, that voice, that old fear, it wasn't mine anymore. So I said yes. I spent days crafting my speech, not perfecting it, just letting it breathe. I didn't want to lecture. I wanted to tell the truth about silence, about starting over, about how writing saved my life, not because it brought recognition, but because it brought me back to myself. When the day came, I stood in a lecture hall full of students, young, tired, hungry for something real. I wore simple clothes, no makeup, just a pendant my grandmother once gave me. I began with this. I used to think disappearing was the worst thing that could happen to a woman. I was wrong. The worst thing is disappearing while still being looked at. The best thing is returning without asking permission. I spoke for 20 minutes. I didn't look at notes. I didn't pace. I just stood there, steady, letting the words find their own rhythm. Afterward, a girl approached me, maybe 19, shaking as she handed me a folded piece of paper. I didn't know anyone else ever felt like I do, she said. I held her hand and replied, "We all do. We just stopped saying it out loud." That night, alone in a hotel room, I opened her note. It said, "Thank you for being a mirror." I saw myself clearly for the first time. I wept, not out of sadness, out of recognition. I wasn't famous. I wasn't rich, but I had become the woman I needed when I was drowning, and that was enough. Back home, I planted a new tree near the water, a willow, soft bending rooted, like me. I no longer marked time by anniversaries or dates circled on a calendar. I marked it by moments, like the first morning I woke up and didn't feel the urge to check my phone, like the day I saw my reflection and didn't flinch, like the night I danced barefoot and alone and felt not lonely, but full. Those were the milestones that mattered. One evening, while organizing old files on my laptop, I stumbled upon a folder labeled Home. It was a mix of photos, scanned documents, tax records, remnants from my old life. At the very top, a PDF of the original deed to the house, the one with both our names on it. I stared at it for a long time. That name, mine, had once been printed next to his in a kind of false permanence. I remembered how proud I'd been when we closed on that house. I thought I was anchoring myself, building something solid, but I had confused possession with belonging. You can own something and still feel unwelcome inside it. I didn't delete the file. I just moved it to a folder called Past, because that's where it belonged now. That weekend, I threw a dinner party at the lake house. Nothing fancy. A long wooden table under string lights, soup, red wine, and a circle of people who had never known me as broken. They only knew me as me. He was there too, the man I'd let into my life, gently, without obligation. He brought flowers and a story about a dog that chased him for 3 blocks. He made everyone laugh. At one point, he caught my eye across the table and raised his glass. No words, just a soft toast from afar. And I thought, this is what partnership should feel like. Not wait, not rescue, just witness. After dinner, people helped clean up, and then slowly, the night unraveled into quiet conversation and candlelight. Someone played a guitar, someone cried. It was beautiful, imperfect, human. Later, when the last guest had gone, I sat on the dock alone. The stars were bright, the air crisp. The willow tree I had planted was starting to lean toward the water, its limbs swaying like it had always belonged. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm proud of you," not to impress, not to perform, but because I meant it. The girl who once signed her name off a deed now had her name on a book, on a garden fence, on the lips of people who said it with love. She hadn't disappeared. She had returned, and she had built a life that required no permission, no justification, and no witness but her own steady breath. I used to think the end of a story meant everything had to be tied up, sealed, with a bow made clean. But real endings are quieter, messier. They don't come with fanfare. They arrive like a soft breath on the back of your neck, reminding you you've made it. I don't have everything figured out. I still have moments of doubt. I still grieve the years I gave away too freely. There are nights when I wake up startled from old dreams, unsure of where I am. But I no longer apologize for that. Healing isn't erasure, it's integration. It's waking up each day and choosing yourself, even when it's hard, even when no one's watching. The lake house is full now, not with people necessarily, but with presence. Every room holds a piece of me. The paint-streaked sunroom where I write. The small upstairs bedroom where I read late into the night. The kitchen where I hum to songs I once silenced. Every corner has become a mirror, not reflecting who I was, but who I've claimed myself to be. Sometimes I get emails from women who say, "How did you do it?" And the truth is I didn't. Not all at once. I didn't leap. I didn't roar. I didn't explode into a new life. I whispered. I trembled. I walked. I took one broken piece at a time and decided it was worthy of keeping. I gave myself permission to begin again, not with fanfare, but with grace. And every day I still do. Because beginning again isn't a moment, it's a practice. And peace isn't a place, it's a decision. So if you're reading this, if you've ever felt invisible, discarded, or afraid to want more, please hear me. You're not too late. You're not too broken. And you are never, ever too much. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. This life I've built isn't loud. It doesn't sparkle on the surface, but it is rooted. It is steady. And every part of it, every scar, every slow triumph belongs entirely to me. I'm not waiting for a fairy tale anymore. I'm not surviving someone else's story. I'm living mine. So thank you for listening, for walking with me. And if you're holding your own quiet pain, your own unread story, your own name waiting to be reclaimed, start where you are. Whisper it if you have to, but begin. Because you matter. Because your voice matters. Because your story, yes, yours, deserves to be heard. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story if it moved you. And if you've ever felt the same, betrayed, discarded, or invisible, leave a comment. Someone will hear you. Your voice matters.